The Corvette and a mid-engine layout have a long history. As in the movie Spaceballs, here's the short version. Engineer Zora Arkus Duntov, considered the father of Corvette, pursued a mid-engine layout through various concepts. He first started with the SERV-1 in 1960. SERV stands for Chevrolet Experimental Research Vehicle. The SERV-1 was followed by the SERV-2 in 1964 and the Aerovette in the late 60s. While Duntov retired in 1975, the idea of a mid-engine Corvette did not go away with him. The Corvette Indy was revealed in the mid-1980s, and the last of the SERV vehicles, the SERV-3, debuted in 1990. But where all those vehicles failed to make it to production, the new C8 did get the green light. To get to the final product you see today required a number of prototype and test vehicles, and that's what we're going to take you through in this video. We think this first vehicle should be considered the spiritual successor to all the mid-engine prototypes that came before it.
So what we're standing in front of right now is a one-of-a-kind vehicle called BlackJack. It was commissioned in about 2014, and the purpose of the vehicle is to start to get the initial learnings on the architecture change from front engine to mid-engine on the Chevrolet Corvette. You have an inkling that the program is going, but there's a number of gates on any development program that the program has to go through in order for it to actually make it into production. But the first one is actually starting into and earnestly developing or designing the platform. So this was instrumental in starting to get an idea that this wasn't going to become some other version of a mid-engine car. This is actually going to show Corvette character. So early on, upper management, including Royce, did get a chance to get into the car. He's been in the car multiple times. And that was really where the program really seemed to take off and get the green light, or at least the initial stages of green light into the development process. Built over about 8 months. The structure starts with 7,000 pounds of aluminum and an NC machine, and about 90% of that got whittled away and recycled, and the rest of it is NC machine componentry that represents the same type of structural integrity as the high-pressure die-cast nodes that are in the current car today. So the vehicle starts out as early on as an idea, which turns into modeling different configurations and concepts for suspension geometry and structure, and how you're going to do this and what type of suspension you're going to put on the car. Suspension geometry is probably 90 to 95% representative of what ended up in final production. The rest of it was operational enough to get the vehicle platform moving so we could use it for testing and validation. But the actual drivability and interior cabin was lifted from a donor C7. So you see basically C7 interior components overlaid on top of the structure to get the platform moving. In the back, we've got the C7 LT1 engine mated to a prototype, one-of-a-kind ZF PDK transmission out of a Porsche. And of course, a little bit of translational magic in the electrical system to get it all talked together and make it work. In the end, you've got a lot of predictions, a lot of models that need validation, and that's kind of the purpose of this vehicle. It's a architectural proof of concept. The appearance of the vehicle is very much like a Holden Ute, so you see kind of a hodgepodge of parts. And a couple of different concepts were actually used for hiding it until they settled on the Ute. Actually, they looked at making it into a station wagon or a van, but ultimately this is kind of the overall shape that was chosen. Although it looks like a Ute, it only really shares 4 components with it. The rest of it is all hand-laid fiberglass over the top, and it's just to kind of cover the platform to kind of hide it from in plain sight. The components are fascia, headlamp, mirrors, and tail lamps, and the rest of it is all hand-built. There were a couple of different concepts because early on the development of the vehicle was very secret, and we were even trying to keep it very secret to a very small group. Only about a dozen people actually used the vehicle during its useful time as a development platform. None of us that were working on it were allowed to talk about it to anybody. That means nobody in your family. My wife and I, even though she works at General Motors, we didn't really discuss the car. We just didn't discuss details. Certainly none of my extended family knew I was working on it until they first started getting unveiled. And I think that's the same way for anybody that's worked on the platform. And especially true for this phase. So this phase, we had actually a driving cover. So we had a cover that covers everything. We had an opening for the windshield. We had things that could pick up and so they didn't get tangled in the wheels. And you drove around with this draped over cover over the top of this even during the day. We did some of the early development at night at times. And we had a protocol in case of aerial flyover for attempts at photography. So we have a cover that we could deploy in about 6 to 10 seconds if we heard something like helicopter rotors or got a message over the radio on the early days that we had an incoming photographer potential. So, commissioned in 2014, we used the car for about 2 years. For the first year or so, we used it pretty intensely for vehicle dynamics development and structural development. Initially, it was going through a rigorous exploration of the development bandwidth that we had. So wide range of spring rates and tire combinations. We got some early learnings on tire development off of this and what we had to do to make the weight shift work and kind of shy away from the lesser desired attributes of a mid-engine and emphasize the advantages of the mid-engine. And still have an idea where we wanted to take the overall character to make it into something that people will recognize today as an evolved Corvette. And then after that, the vehicle extended its useful life by starting to do some studies. We had some leftover availability on the platform for exhaust routing and exhaust noise, sound quality enhancement. Because a mid-engine configuration for exhaust is different than a front engine. Obviously, the exhaust kind of comes up and out rather than down and under. So that change in character, and we started to get an idea of what type of noise emanation is coming into the cabin. Those type of things. We actually use this as a early test bed to make sure we were headed the right direction when we got to the next phase. So as the program picks up steam, you move to what we call an architectural mule phase. And so one of one, this is one of about 11 operational vehicles in our architectural mule phase. So we use that, again, a lot of the same type of things that we were learning, but with a wider usage now. We're starting to integrate some of the components that weren't present in the proof of concept. And this is where the vehicle starts to really take shape. So the understructure and everything is very representative, made off of, you're starting to get parts that are high-pressure die cast, so they're no longer NC machined or anything like that. And again, you're kind of funneling down what you need to learn. Early on, we needed to learn, okay, what are the bounds of the architecture? What are the things we're going to run into that we have to pay attention to? What are the things that, we got those parts nailed? And then that funnel kind of closes in a little bit more on the mule phase. And you get more and more people operating the vehicle. So we had ones dedicated to electrical development, transmission development, and engine, powertrain, and obviously vehicle dynamics, and starting to get some other learnings on this in this phase. So I mentioned it's one of about 11 vehicles in this phase. More extended usage, but again, high degree of security, and not fully representative from an exterior interior. So a lot of the panels are hang-on panels that are sort of pasted on, very prototype stuff, and then you got this vinyl hanging camo on top of it. There's some repurposed stuff because as you're funneling what you need to learn, you're starting to learn about the first time you're piecing together an LT2 engine with the new Tremec transmission and the new cybersecurity enhanced global architecture for electrical. and you don't need a fully representative interior. You just need the seating position to be pretty much correct. And so you see repurposed C7 components like door panels that are kind of mated together. A very Spartan interior, which is dead giveaway is the cardboard with tape on it for a dash, and brake bent steel panel with some gauges pasted to it. Makes the car functional, and it gets the platform moving so you can start to put these pieces together of the puzzle to turn it into the Corvette that we know today. We move into the integration vehicle phase, and this is where the vehicle really starts to come together as a real vehicle. You're starting to get parts that are off of pre-production or production tooling, and this is where the previous phase learnings and a pile of parts all kind of come together, and you need to start to mold that and integrate it into a recognizable whole that's a Corvette with the DNA of a Corvette. In this phase, we went from 1 of 1 to 1 of 11. Here we built over 100. Again, all 3 of these phases are all hand built in a prototype line in Warren, Michigan. This phase, if you were to take all this hanging camo off, would look much like the production vehicle is today. Some of the panels aren't painted, but this is also the phase of the development process where the cars can actually go off property and live in the real world. So these are the phase vehicles that you actually saw at gas stations or driving around in Ohio or California or Colorado or wherever else we did testing. Versions of these made it to racetracks all across the United States and even at the Nürburgring. We still have modified camo versions that we're using because obviously you can't have this on here for representative aero development, so you have to take these off, but only at the track. And then you had to have a modified camo package at the track that didn't affect aero, but still hid attributes of it that were still under wraps. And the other thing that isn't really in this, because we don't have very many examples of it left, but the interior early on was completely camouflaged. So there was kind of a black hanging camo over almost all of the surfaces, including the seat. Steering wheel had a little wrap around it that you could take off, but you had to put it on right away. The IP instrument cluster and everything had to remain there. But as soon as the vehicle was revealed and we could actually get rid of the camo, after working for years with the camo on, we decided we were having a camo removal party. So many of the groups tore the camo off, and a lot of the interior stuff has all been disposed of now. So that's why you don't see that. It was actually hard to find one that still had vinyl camo on it because most of those got scrapped as well. This phase is actually used from early development, integration of all the components and representative structure, geometry, electrical systems, all the electronic systems that need to work together from steering to MR, on the MR-equipped cars, ELSD, etc. And you take that all the way through validation of the platform. About 30 of these vehicles were barrier tested for regulatory and crashworthiness validation, and actually used for final verification of the platform. This represents kind of the end of the vehicle development and integration phase, and that's where you're finalizing your release specs and final tuning with this phase, and then you have to move on and actually build the car in the plant. And that'll be the next phase of the development process when you actually build the car. So you go from a little over 100 to actual vehicles that are built in the plant to validate the process. So you've come in to develop this vehicle, you've released all the specs, and you say this is the vehicle we want to build from an integration standpoint and a vehicle development standpoint. Then you have to validate that it can actually be built in the plant. So there's multiple phases of many phases of the production build system. Early on, you're building some initial cars, pre-production vehicles, to validate the process and a lot of those will have an EX on the VIN, and the majority of those will never be sold to the public. They may be repurposed inside of General Motors or scrapped outright. And then eventually you'll get to the point where the car is validated enough in the process that we switch over to a saleable phase. And that saleable phase actually has VINs and are certified for use. And that's where you extend it in a captured test fleet inside of the company, where other engineers and non-engineers even actually live with the vehicle day in and day out, report any issues. We chase those down and fix those so that the customer gets a good car in the end.